Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our WhereWhere webinar on Website Accessibility 101, how to design user-friendly web experiences for everyone. My name is Nate Janisi. I'm the Director of User Experience at WhereWhere, and I'm proud to be here with Alyssa Pine, one of our senior UI designers. Between the two of us, we have over 20 years of experience building websites and web apps and digital platforms with accessibility in mind. Before we kick this off, I want to acknowledge the irony of a presentation on accessibility not being closed captioned. Unfortunately, our technology situation does not support it at the moment. However, we will provide a transcript with the recording when we post it to our website, and we will be sending out this recording to all of you via email tomorrow. If you have any questions, please feel free to add them to the comment box, and we will get to as many as we have time for at the end. And if we don't get to your question today, please don't worry. We'll do our best to reach out to you directly when we finish up here. So today we're going to talk about what accessibility is and why it's important, and we're going to talk about it in the context of an actual person. We're going to call them Charlie. We're going to show you some ways that disabilities can impact a browsing experience. We'll cover some tests and tools to ensure your sites are accessible, and finally show you some real-world examples of the positive impacts of accessibility in action. But first, let me tell you a little bit about WhereWhere. For those unfamiliar, WhereWhere is a digital experience agency driving smart growth for clients through strategy and activation. And what that means is we partner with our clients to do things like design, build, and optimize their websites and online experiences. We improve Salesforce CRMs to increase productivity or drive adoption, help our partners develop and execute multi-channel digital campaigns across their owned and earned channels. And whatever your goal, basically, we've got a team in-house that can help you combine technology and digital solutions to achieve it. We work with a wide depth and breadth of clients across a variety of industries, from home goods to home builders, from teachers to tech companies. We've covered a lot of ground and worked with a lot of people. I'm sure some of you will recognize at least a few of the names on this slide. So let's get into the reason we're here, and that's to talk a little bit about web accessibility. And to kick that off, I'm going to hand things over to Alyssa.
Yeah, thank you, Nate. So before we dive in, let's first go into what we mean by web accessibility. So web accessibility means that websites, tools, and technologies are designed and developed so that people with all abilities can use them. And more specifically, it means that people can perceive, understand, navigate, and interact with the web, as well as contribute to the web. So you may be thinking that people with disabilities are edge cases that you don't need to tailor your whole website for, but let's take a look at some of the numbers. So in the US alone, about 26% of adults are living with some type of disability or limitation that could hinder them from using your website. So the visual aid on the right depicts that 26% in blue, while the gray represents people with no limitations. And as you can see, that's a lot of blue. So this chart is demonstrating web accessibility as it pertains to disabilities. But let's think a little bit more broadly and consider how creating accessible online experiences can benefit everyone. So designing a web experience for everyone means considering a variety of disabilities and limitations that may have varying levels of severity or that are even just temporary, like the examples on the right here. So some of these disabilities can include hearing impairments, which may vary from partial to full deafness, cognitive impairments, which encompasses dyslexia, learning disabilities, trouble concentrating, and even anxiety, neurological limitations like brain injuries or proneness to seizures. We have speech impairments such as dyslexia and slurred speech, vision impairments, including color blindness, as well as partial blindness in one eye or full blindness in both. And then physical impairments, whether because of an arm injury or hand injury or a more serious, degenerative disease. Have a stutter today. And it's important to note that these disabilities are not mutually exclusive. So users can experience any combination of these impairments at any time. And like I mentioned before, accessible practices also benefit situational or temporary limitations, such as people with temporary disabilities like a broken arm or older people with changing abilities due to aging. So to give you a sense of how certain disabilities like this can affect users on your website, let's meet Charlie. So Charlie has early onset Parkinson's disease, which causes shaky hands and reduced mobility. Charlie also has an occasional vision impairment known as tunnel vision or the loss of peripheral vision. And Charlie often has trouble concentrating, which is a common cognitive challenge. So we're going to demonstrate what it looks like for Charlie to use the web with these conditions. For these examples, we're using a website we're all familiar with, weather.com, and a simulator tool to show what each of these challenges looks like in terms of web usability. And we'll also discuss some of the ways we can empower users like Charlie. So this first example demonstrates what it's like for Charlie with their shaky hands and reduced mobility to use a mouse. It might be a bit small here, but you may have noticed the double cursor, which indicates where Charlie is trying to move their mouse, but where it ends up instead due to their condition. So an accessible practice that would immensely help Charlie navigate here is keyboard compatibility, or ensuring that users can control all website functions with their keyboard. So these functions can include the ability to tab between links, as well as the ability to clearly see which link you are currently tabbed to, the ability to hit enter to select a particular link, and then the ability to use your up and down arrows to scroll up and down the page. Moving on to our next example, this demonstrates Charlie's tunnel vision as they try to use the weather.com website. As you can see, only a small portion of the whole page is viewable at a time, and unfortunately in this case, most of the page is taken up with ads. So what would ultimately help Charlie in this case would be to follow web best practices for positioning key elements in content, differentiating between your content and ads to the extent possible, and then maintaining brand consistency to reduce confusion. On our last example, we are demonstrating what it could be like on a website when you are distracted or unable to concentrate. So you can see Charlie's trains of thought pop up on the screen, and then that movement of objects on the screen on the page suggests the inability to discern information on the screen. I'm sure we can all relate to this example of trying to perform a task while our minds are elsewhere. Everything just kind of gets jumbled up and you can't differentiate information. So what ultimately helps in instances like this is to follow layout best practices. So using simple layouts and leveraging white space to help your content stand out better. Leveraging content headings and clear, concise language to reduce cognitive load. And then using a Z or an F-shaped pattern for content to help. So those are patterns that are based on eye movement. And then next we have a few other examples of what this website could look like for other users. So this demonstrates what even a situational limitation like being out in bright sunlight looks like. But even without any of these disabilities or limitations, I think we can all relate to Charlie and think of a time when we are frustrated by or even unable to use a website because of inaccessible practices.
Yeah, to that point, Alyssa, we shouldn't think about creating accessible websites as being only for people with disabilities. Ultimately, a more accessible website creates better experiences for everyone. So not only from a user experience perspective, but if we look at the numbers, you can see that improving your overall digital experience can increase conversions by as much as 60%, which is a huge impact. And if that's not enough reason to create better experiences, there's an enormous market of users with disabilities who you would be excluding without an accessible website. So not only is building an accessible website the right thing to do, it's also financially responsible and can also prevent you from getting into legal trouble, as we'll see on the next slide. So there's a misnomer that creating an accessible website needs to be expensive or time consuming, which is not the case. And even if it was, it's not nearly as costly as the price of remediation and the potential lawsuits that can occur if you are sued for having an inaccessible site. You can see some of the stats here that represent that these kind of lawsuits are on the rise, and it's best to get ahead of them and build an accessible site from the start. So one way to do that is to consider all of your users' needs and keep accessibility in mind throughout the entire project. From wireframes to development, and Alyssa's going to talk a little bit about some of the ways that you can do that and keep accessibility for everyone at the forefront of your projects.
Yeah, so keeping in mind that the 26% of your users will have specific accessibility needs, let's kind of think about different ways that we can support those needs. First, we don't want to assume that you can pinpoint someone's disability just by looking at them. Different disabilities require different considerations and solutions. So let's take a closer look at potential disabilities and ways to ensure that your site is still a good experience for everyone. So first, we're going to go into motor function issues. So these issues can include any weakness or limitation of muscular control, limitations of sensation, pain that impedes movement, and potentially missing limbs. So due to these potential impairments, some of your users may prefer to use keyboard navigation instead of a mouse or touch screen. So again, it's important to ensure that your website can be used with a keyboard. Other users might only have access or the ability to use mobile devices and touchscreens, so it's important to make sure that your website is responsive and is not limited to one orientation like portrait mode. And lastly, as a general rule of thumb for good user experience, it's important to have easy to hit buttons, so each button should have sufficient space around it and should be placed in locations that are both easy to find and to touch. So our next grouping is cognitive disabilities. So this may affect any part of the nervous system and impact how well people hear, move, see, speak, and understand information. It does not necessarily impact intelligence, but it can impact cognitive load and can also cause susceptibility to seizures. So with this susceptibility to seizures in mind, it's important to avoid any flashing or jarring animations on your website. That's not to say that you can't use animations. I know they typically increase engagement and can bring life to a screen. They should just remain very subtle and smooth at all times. Similarly, large movements or unexpected audio can be distracting, annoying, and even triggering for users. So for this reason, we strongly recommend no autoplay of video or audio content. So instead, just start with everything paused and muted by default and allow users to click the play button themselves when they want to engage with that content. Next up, we have hearing impairments and deafness. So hearing impairments range from mild or moderate hearing loss in one ear to substantial or full hearing loss in both ears. So with this range of users in mind, it's important to provide captions, the irony again, on video content and transcripts for audio content. We will provide that again. And I know myself and a lot of other non-hearing impaired folks personally prefer to watch shows and movies with captions on, especially in louder environments. So there's a real life example for you of benefiting from an accessible practice. And lastly, we have visual impairments and blindness. So these impairments range from mild or moderate vision loss in one eye to substantial or complete vision loss in both eyes. And this also includes color blindness. So one quick and easy way to make sure that your site is more accessible for visual impairments is by checking color contrast. So that is the contrast of text content on a background. And it's also important to make sure that users can zoom in and out on content. So make sure that this setting is not disabled. If you remember Charlie, some users like them might see best in the center of their visual field, so they might prefer to zoom in and scroll as needed. Other users, especially those with more serious visual impairments, might need to rely on assistive technologies such as a screen reader to interact with your website. So screen readers simply render the text and image content into speech or braille output so that users who have vision difficulties can access your website's information just in a different way. So in order to make sure the screen reader is offering the best possible rendition of your site, it's essential that you add alt text for images. So that's the written explanation of an image, and that's what the screen reader will provide to users who cannot see that imagery. Alt text has also been proven to help boost your SEO, so there's an added bonus. And as we've mentioned before, it's important to make sure that your website is keyboard compatible because that's how users operate a screen reader. So overall, these are the main considerations you should keep in mind to make sure that you're providing an accessible experience across the board. That being said, you may not know where you are falling short on your website and how to measure its accessibility. Before we go into measuring accessibility, it's important to first note that it is not a checkbox that you can just check and be done with. Just like SEO and performance, it's an ongoing process that requires continuous improvement. And how those improvements get measured is through a set of criteria known as the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. So there have been multiple versions of these guidelines that have been updated over the years. 2.1 is the latest version. 508 compliance, which you may have heard of, is a subset of older WCAG 2.0 criteria. And Section 508 requires that federal government websites and applications be accessible for people with disabilities. So the guidelines have 3 levels of compliance that vary in terms of stringency, A, AA, and AAA. And you can see in our chart demonstration that the levels are cumulative, so they build off of each other. We typically aim for AA compliance, which benefits the largest population of users without having to put in significant effort. Sometimes AAA can be near impossible to attain, so it is generally not required unless a specific situation demands it. And if you're ever uncertain about which level of compliance you should strive for, WhereAware can help assess your website or perform an audit to provide a recommendation for you. And taking a look at one of these criteria in action, we have an example for you here that is geared towards low vision or colorblind users. So this ensures that your color contrast meets the minimum requirement. We have 3 levels here, or 3 examples here with varying levels of success. So on the left here, we have an example that will always fail, and that is because the combination of that text color on the background color, no matter the text size, will always fail, will never meet the minimum. The example in the middle is a pass because that button text is larger, meaning it's at least 18 pixels. So that combination meets the contrast minimum. The example on the right is an ideal scenario because that combination of that text color and that background color, no matter what the text size, will always meet the contrast minimum. And to actually test this, let's take a look at one of our tools. So this is a color contrast checker, and that's what we would use to test the previous example. So you can see that we have white text on a blue background, and with how small that text is, this example is currently failing that WCAG 2.1 AA requirement, which, if you recall, is what we typically aim for. We have a variety of some other tools that we like to use throughout our design and development process to make accessibility improvements. So we have those listed out here. Folks on this call may want to check out the Google Lighthouse automated testing tool. This tool rates your website's individual pages based on performance, accessibility, SEO, and best practice criteria, and then it provides you with a score. So it's more than just accessibility, but it plays a big role. And to provide a good user experience, sites should strive to have a score within the 90 to 100 range. A score of 100 is extremely difficult to hit and is usually not expected due to the level of effort it would take. And just a caveat here is that your site score will change as you update page content. And again, it is page specific. So just a note, we have all of these linked, so you'll be able to explore them when you receive this deck.
Thanks, Alyssa. So we've talked a lot about real-world examples of disabilities and tools to ensure your experiences are accessible, but let's see some examples of how, when implemented correctly, accessible websites bring about a better user experience for everyone. So many of you may recognize and use Cuisinart products. We as WhereAware manage Cuisinart's Optimizely website on an ongoing basis, and part of that involves running continuous accessibility checks. So at the beginning of the engagement, we scan the site weekly to look for ways to improve the experience and accessibility. From an accessibility standpoint, we managed to remediate over 385,000 violations in just a little over a year. We improved their site improved score to over 5 points above the industry benchmark. So because of these improvements, they're now spending less money on remediation and monitoring accessibility, which frees up more time for other user experience efforts. So that's a demonstrable ROI there for Cuisinart. Now I get to see some work that we did with a worldwide hotel chain to improve their call center technology. The old system was built on several legacy and separate programs. This setup required users to jump between platforms, take physical notes, and navigate really unintuitive older interfaces. So think MS-DOS for those of you old enough to know what that is. We came in and performed a UX audit. We shadowed users in the call centers. We listened to their problems, and we followed that up with detailed prototypes that we were able to validate and watch people use in their real environments with testing sessions. Ultimately, we combined several old clunky systems into a single Salesforce instance, creating a more accessible web-based experience. This experience implemented common web standards for tabbing and accessibility. and more closely mimicked what we would consider a typical consumer-based booking system. Because of this more accessible version, we watched an agent who was previously and consistently in the bottom 10% of performers every year. They managed to virtually overnight improve their performance to the top 3%. So that was a really rewarding and powerful thing to watch happen. Along with that, because the website was easier to use for everyone, we wound up reducing their training time by 80%, which provided a significant ROI in an industry with a lot of turnover in call centers. The League of Women Voters is dedicated to bringing election information to the public to allow them to make more informed voting decisions. So you can imagine that accessibility is an important aspect of ensuring everyone being able to use their website. So we kicked off this project with an accessibility first approach to wireframing. As you can see there on the left, we started by building pages with only the accessibility structure in mind, worrying less about the layout and more about how the content should be understood, which translates directly into how a screen reader would present the content to users. By starting with the accessibility first, as opposed to say layout and design, we got the entire team focused on ensuring things were built with accessibility in mind from the beginning. So from a code perspective, this helped the site stay accessible and violation free. However, you still need to remain focused, obviously, on the overall user experience of the interface and the front end, because in theory, you can have a zero testable violations, but still have a totally inaccessible experience for your users. In terms of the benefits of this approach of accessibility first, the old platform had an average of 3 critical accessibility violations per screen. The new platform has 0. That improved their overall Lighthouse performance score from an 84 to a 97, so a 13-point improvement there. Many of you may be familiar with the AIGA. We were tasked with redesigning their website, which involved not only a brand refresh, but also merging several digital entities into a single site on a new platform. That was Drupal with Acquia Site Studio. So we performed an accessibility audit at the onset of the project to determine the severity of their current situation. And then as we built the new platform, we performed ongoing accessibility testing from sprint to sprint to address the critical issues. And we focused on the critical issues and the severe issues. And then part of this was training the AIGA staff on how to produce more accessible content, including things like paying attention to content hierarchy and using headings correctly, image alt tagging, and then paying attention to the page structure, among many other things. So through that, their team learned that maintaining accessible standards is an ongoing effort, and we were able to get them off on the right foot so that they could maintain a really accessible website. As a result, their overall Lighthouse performance score went up 30 points due to the redesign and replatform from a 58 to an 88, which is a pretty tremendous jump. So if you take nothing else away from this webinar, keep in mind that everyone benefits from accessible practices and that accessibility optimization is a continuous effort, just like maintaining performance or SEO standards. So we thank everyone for being here. That concludes the presentation piece, but we're going to take a few questions from the chat if you want to stick around. Looking through, and we have a good one here from Katie. Katie asks a really relevant and valid question of what is the best way to get started, which is a great question. The easy kind of quick, low effort way to start is to run Google Lighthouse on your site. You can start with maybe the top 5 pages that get the most traffic to get a sense of your overall kind of average score and see what types of violations you're dealing with. Certain violations are going to require a developer, but there are still plenty of things that you can do from a content administrator perspective that you can start addressing without development efforts, like adding alt tags to images and making sure that you're using proper headings, hierarchy, etc. Clear, concise language, jargon-free language, things that are easy to read, making sure that you're using the right, the right reading level, and that you're at something that everybody can kind of understand. So those accessibilities will have varying degrees of user impact, and we recommend focusing on the most severe issues first, and then kind of building a backlog for the rest. As we mentioned, and one of the key takeaways is that this is a process. So you're not going to get everything done at once. It's not flipping a switch. It's not checking a box. So don't try to boil the ocean all at once. Try to focus on the things that have the biggest impact and then kind of move incrementally through the rest.
at that.
Alyssa, you want to
Yeah.
find one that you like and take?
Yeah, I see a question here from Deanna that I think is really pertinent. So how do I go about fixing my accessibility problems? So first off, that all depends on what types of issues you're up against. So like Nate said, some issues will require a developer, but a lot of the most common issues are within your website content. So those, like Nate said, can be fixed now with some content administration. So that can include things like color contrast, adding labels to your form inputs, making link and button text meaningful so that people have a clear understanding of where that button will take you. And then using proper headings markup is another example. Of course, an agency like WearAware can be most helpful here. So we can audit your digital experience, help you understand the level of effort involved, and then prioritize and remediate the issues that have the biggest impact. So yeah, thank you all for those questions.
Yeah, thank you. So we're coming up on time here. So we really thank everyone for being here and coming to spend your time with us today. We hope you learned something, and we want everyone to go forth and build better experiences, not only for those with disabilities, but for everyone. So if you want to talk about disability, or if you want to talk about accessibility, with anyone on our team is available to chat with you, and we can come in and take a look at things. So you can see there, you can reach us at sales@wearaware.com. If you reach out to us, we'll get back to you shortly. And again, any questions that we didn't get to answer, we'll try to get back to you today or soon with those answers and help you out as we can. So with that, we're going to wrap up and say goodbye, and we hope to see everyone again soon. And we thank you for spending your time with us.
Thank you, everyone.